We will have in-depth conversation after Prime Minister Abhisit. How do I introduce Prime Minister Abhisit? Aside from the CV that you already have in your booklet, let me say that Justin Trudeau is the Abhisit of Canada. Because when Prime Minister Abhisit came into politics, that was the sentiment that he had generated among the Thai public. He went to Oxford, finished PPE, first class honor, was a member of the Oxford Union, quick on his feet. David Cameron is 2 years behind him, but Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary now, was his classmate. And Boris Johnson claimed to me that he is the only one classmate of Prime Minister Abhisit at Oxford who could spell his last name, how many J's there? How many J's in Vejjajiva? But Prime Minister Abhisit served many positions until he came to the premiership in 2008 and to 2011, and had left his mark on many of the policies that Thailand has conceived for its people. And in the end, Prime Minister Abhisit came to the conclusion, as his article in this volume testifies, that the socio-cultural community is probably the most important of all communities, because without a sense of belonging, sense of ownership, sense of participation, or the need to participate, to contribute into the ASEAN growth, the other two communities, the other two pillars that President Arroyo has treated them all, political, security, economic, the other two would not make any sense until we have a sense of one vision, one community, and one identity. Prime Minister Abhisit, the floor is yours, please.
President Arroyo, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to the Department of Foreign Affairs and also to ERIA for holding this forum and giving me this wonderful opportunity to both look back and look forward on ASEAN. Because we've had so many very serious speeches, allow me just a couple of minutes to respond to Dr. Surin's introduction concerning my good friend Boris Johnson. Because many of you say he makes outrageous claims. But I will say that I just found out that he claims that he could spell my surname, the only person to do so. Actually, that's true. Because a few years ago, a Thai person went to London and attended his book signing ceremony. And he gave the book to Boris and said he was going to give this book to Mr. Vejjajiva. And of course, being a Thai, he said, "Let me help you spell that." And Boris said, No, I know him, I can spell his name. And he got it right. So there you go. Just a little anecdote to relax things a bit before we move on to the much more serious matter of the future of ASEAN. Now, obviously, I don't have the same privilege as Madam President of being able to attend 9 to 10 ASEAN summits. I'm not sure any time Prime Minister would ever have that privilege. But there is a possibility, you know, if I'm successful in my political endeavors, it could be that 2 years from now, I would be able to assume the chairmanship of ASEAN for the second time. But that's not what we are here to talk about today. We're here to look back and look forward. And I will begin by saying this. I was very touched by a number of panelists this morning and also by President Arroyo's remark, that we recognize the vision of the founding fathers. It was very visionary of them, very courageous of them, very innovative of them to start this association of Southeast Asian nations. And one of the measures of success, I guess, would be maybe if we engage in this thought exercise. What would the founders, our founding fathers, feel if they see ASEAN today? And I think there can be no doubt that they would all say that ASEAN has surely exceeded all of their expectations. Remember, this association was founded by a common need to respond basically to the communist threat, to ensure that the 5 founding nations could continue to enjoy development and peace. But 50 years on, the association has achieved much, much more. For one thing, we now have 10 nations in the association. Indeed, with the exception of Timor-Leste, who I expect should be admitted to the association sooner or later. That means all Southeast Asian nations now belong to ASEAN. And although security was the prime objective, so much progress has been made, not just on security matters, but on the economic fronts. The ASEAN Free Trade Area, the continuing economic integration, the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community, and the engagement with the rest of the world, with all the free trade agreements completed with all 6+ dialogue partners, and of course now a key role in the global arena in the form of the ASEAN Regional Forum and also the East Asia Summit. That is how far ASEAN has come in the last 5 decades. But from my perspective, let me say this. Except for my first 3 years, a period which I do not remember much, if anything, ASEAN has existed all my life. My political career spanning 25 years is half of ASEAN's life. And I know it's a long shot, but there is a remote chance that I will still be here when ASEAN turns 100. What has ASEAN meant to me? How have I been involved in this project? And despite all the success that I have mentioned, the fact of the matter is we have to recognize that, especially seen from outside, people outside the region do not recognize ASEAN as a success the way we do. And that is something that should concern us. And in many ways, they are justified. If you look at the other regional integration arrangements around the world, it would be quite hard to argue that ours has been one of the most successful ones. Yes, all of these integration arrangements have problems, but in terms of the depth of integration, it would be very hard to argue that we have outperformed or even performed as well as other regional arrangements. And yes, we may be proud of the level of success despite the financial crisis, despite the tsunami and other circumstances which could derail these kinds of projects. But given the recognition that this region is highly economically successful, it could certainly be argued that we are still punching below our weight. Which is why, as we move forward to the next 50 years, it's very important to see what we can do to improve ASEAN integration. But we have to start first with aspirations. What do we want to be? I think it's clear from the various statements and in the minds of all of us who have worked with ASEAN, we want to be economically competitive as a region. We want this region to be peaceful and stable. And most importantly, we now want to be a significant global player. My message from me to you all today is all this can only happen if we can somehow build what we call an ASEAN identity. For too long, much of the focus on ASEAN integration had been on technical economic issues. I'm always frustrated that in Thailand, the AEC is synonymous with the ASEAN community. A lot of people feel that's what the ASEAN community is about. Some kind of economic arrangements, free trade, common market. And there are expectations that the AEC will be the driving force in the community building process. And I agree we can do a lot more, and we should do a lot more in terms of economic integration to benefit our people. We must do that. There's a lot of unfinished work. I'd like to see RCEP negotiations completed. I'd like to see non-tariff barriers being removed. I'd like to see ASEAN play a role as one region in the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And I'd like to see the private sector getting together, maybe perhaps producing a product that carries an ASEAN brand. These would all be very significant. This would surely help the prosperity of the region. But my message is you can only go so far with economic integration. Why? First, the reality of the diversity in the region means that complete integration will not be easily achieved, and certainly not quickly. Secondly, we can be proud of the many agreements we sign, but the fact of the matter is intra-ASEAN trade as a proportion of the region's trade continues to be very low. And more surprising than that, in countries like my own, many businesses don't even take advantage or benefit from the ASEAN free trade area, either because it's too much trouble to do that or because they feel that other markets are more important. And given the evolution of trade deals, despite the setback in globalization, we have to admit that much of the economic integration arrangements in ASEAN will be superseded by bilateral deals, by multilateral deals like the TPP and others, and therefore it's hard to see how the AEC itself could be in the driving seat in terms of providing that fundamental for a community building process. More than that, even economic integration as we move ahead is concerned, it is no longer about reduction of tariffs. If we want a common market, we'll have to talk about freedom of movement of labor. We have to talk about more mutual recognitions of the professions, which has already been mentioned this morning. All of this will require changes in domestic law. And for changes in domestic law to be possible, you will require these items to be high on the domestic political agenda. And that won't happen until the peoples of ASEAN feel that these are the priorities. That's why ASEAN identity is the key to community building. And by ASEAN identity, I mean we must have this sense of common destiny and common values.